to another episode of Rock Boys Football State of the Program for Florida State. And this is one of those conversations that can look a lot different for a lot of different Florida State fans. And what I mean by that is that you could pull 100 Florida State fans, ask them where they think this program's at. You might get 100 different answers. Now, I'm going to start this episode with, as I'm preparing this one, as I'm kind of getting my notes in place, that popped in my head, and I kind of feel like this might be true. And that is, it's never good to go 2-10. It is never good to have the bottom fall out like it did with Florida State in 2024. Does that season kind of help Mike Norvell in the future of his tenure at Florida State? I think there's a very strong possibility that it does. And what I mean by that is, look, when Florida State was turning the corner, when they were winning football games in 2022, when they were winning football games in 2023, it kind of allowed all of us to, as well as Mike Norvell, I think, to ignore some of the problems that were present with this Florida State program. That's from a coaching staff standpoint. That's from a talent acquisition standpoint. Look, when you're winning, when you're going 13-1, you don't look at your program and say, how can we make it better? I think the more the conversation is, how can we continue the track that we're on? Although Florida State was winning, there were some things within this program that were underlying concerns that weren't really getting talked about because Florida State was winning on the football field. Does going 2-10 in 2024, does that force Mike Norvell to make the changes necessary to kind of optimize this Florida State program going over the next couple of years? That's kind of the take that I have. I want to talk about some of the things we've seen change in terms of how Mike Norvell wants to run this program. Going to evaluate what talent acquisition looks like, what player development looks like. Before we get into it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and to the Florida State fans. Let it fly in the comments section. I think there are certainly going to be some fans that disagree with this take, and I think that that's very fair. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it now. On the field play for Florida State over the last couple of years, it was clearly going in the right direction. I think what should at least excite Florida State fans is you saw what Mike Norvell can do as a coach, right? 10-3 in 2022, 13-1 in 2023. The ceiling with Mike Norvell as your head coach is pretty damn high because you saw the ceiling kind of start to get reached over the last couple of years. There's a lot of programs across the country where you just don't know how high the ceiling is with that particular head coach. At least in Florida State's standpoint, or from Florida State's perspective, like you have a ceiling that is really, really dang high. That is competing for ACC championships. That's competing for national championships. That's probably where it starts. Now in 2024, 2-10, the bottom fell out, and I think it forced Mike Norvell to look at this program and really identify some of those underlying concerns that none of us were talking about 12 months ago because you didn't really feel like you needed to talk about the things that weren't going right because it felt like there were a lot of things going right. That's what I want to get into, and I think it starts with talent acquisition, right? We kind of always felt like this. Look, Florida State really started to turn the corner. They were a program that on the football field in the falls on Saturday – it seemed to be one of the hottest teams in the country. And it never really seemed like the recruiting, specifically at the high school level, really followed the success. You look at the high school recruiting ranks, kind of hovering around 20th, sneaking into the top 15 in 2024. It never really felt like Florida State maximized their potential as a program on the high school recruiting trail, even when they were winning all of those football games. And it felt like there was just way too much attention that was put into the transfer portal. And you look at the transfer portal rank, is one of the things that Mike Norvell has done very, very good at over there. I should say Mike Norvell has used the transfer portal extremely effectively overall during his tenure at Florida State. It felt like Florida State might have been a little bit too reliant on the transfer portal and not relying enough on the high school recruiting trail. And I think you saw the results of that in 2024 where you missed on a bunch of transfer portal additions and you didn't have the high school pipeline to kind of make up for it. And that's when you had the bottom really fall out. And you look at some of the glaring problems with how Florida State was operating on the trail, it was probably the line of scrimmage play. I mean, 4 blue chip offensive line prospects committed and signed with Florida in a 3-year span. That's just not national championship caliber. And that's that one position where you can't build the offensive line consistently through the transfer portal. Now, I give Mike Norvell a ton of credit. They kind of had to. They didn't really have a choice going into the 2025 year. They had to grab a blind. They did a really good job. I think this Florida State offensive line is going to be significantly better going into 2025. I think that the bottom falling out made Mike Norvell look at this program and say, hey, we got to start doing a better job on the high school recruiting trail, and we got to start bringing in big bodies on the line of scrimmage from the high school ranks, because we are not going to be competing for national championships consistently if we have to build our roster specifically along the line of scrimmage through the transfer portal every single year. The talent acquisition needs to get better, especially at the high school ranks. I love that Mike Norvell is using the transfer portal, but you don't want to be relying on it. You want the bulk of your roster, the bulk of your contributors on the football field on Saturdays being high school guys that have been developed in your program. That even when Florida State was winning a lot of football games, it never really felt to be the case. Does that 2-10 season with the bottom really falling out make Mike Norvell prioritize the high school recruiting trail a little bit more than the transfer portal? I think that is going to be the case moving forward for Florida State. The next thing you probably want to talk about is the player development. And player development just has not been good enough. And you see all the NFL draft picks that Florida State put out in 2024. Look, and I'm not ignoring the fact that you can develop transfer portal additions, right? Jared Verse got better during his time at Florida State. You look at a bunch of these names, even a guy like Jordan Travis, who was, essentially a transfer portal guy, but got developed in Tallahassee. I'm not saying you can't develop transfer portal players, because you certainly can, but you look at the NFL draft picks in 2024, which was a massive talking point for a lot of Florida State fans, and said, yeah, it's really good that you have 10 plus guys getting selected in the NFL draft from your roster. The majority of those guys were transfer portal additions. And the guys that committed to Florida State out of the high school ranks weren't necessarily the guys playing the biggest role on this Florida State team over the last couple of years. That's going to need to change. Now, the question is, how do you change that? One, you got to recruit the high school ranks better. And we just talked about that. I think lastly, you probably got to get the coaching staff right. And this was probably the most beneficial result of going 2-10. There were certain members of this coaching staff that we just knew weren't good enough. They weren't good enough recruiters. They weren't good enough player developers. And again, we kind of just overlooked it. I think Mike Norvell overlooked it because, hey, how are you going to fire a coach after going 13-1 or after going 10-3? It's very hard to do that. When you go 2-10, it becomes a little bit more easy. And that's exactly what Florida State did. They completely revamped the coaching staff. And I'll say this, I think they did a damn good job. Gus Malzahn, I think, one of the better and more experienced offensive-minded coaches that you see in the country. Herb Hand, one of the best developers on the offensive line that you see in the country. Tony White, probably a top 10 defensive coordinator in all of college football. Terrence Knight, an elite defensive line coach. You knew you had a good one with Patrick Surtain. Patrick Surtain was really one of the only coaches on staff that you looked at over the last couple of years and said, yeah, that he's good. The rest, you had a bunch of question marks with. And going 2-10 forced Mike Norvell to say, hey, we got to make some changes to the coaching staff that probably could have happened over the last couple of years, but didn't because of the success that Florida State had on the football field. I guess what I'm trying to say here is you're kind of at a crossroads, and you're going to figure out what Mike Norvell's tenure is going to look like in Tallahassee over the next 2 years. Going 2-10 could be a blessing in disguise for Mike Norvell and Florida. That's the optimistic way of looking at it. And we're sitting here early February. You might as well look at it from an optimistic lens. The optimistic lens is, hey, 2-10, the bottom falling out, forced Mike Norvell to make the changes that really needed to happen, even when Florida State was winning football games, to really optimize Florida State. we'll see if those changes take place, and we'll see if Florida State can get back on track. Now, you look at going into 2025, I don't think this is a ACC championship college football playoff caliber roster, but I do think you are looking at 2025 and say let's set the groundwork again to get back to where we belong as a program. This could be a blessing in disguise, and we will see. But going 2-10 did not buy Mike Norvell a ton of time. And so if you're Mike Norvell, Florida State, you got to start getting it going into 2025. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Let it fly in the comment section too. I think there's certainly some flaws that you could pick with my argument about this program. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section, and we'll talk to y'all later.